very much for asking.
Streaming.
Well, welcome. I hope you all had a chance to get some pizza or water, beers. We've got a couple interesting talks tonight. We've got David Bock presenting on DevOps and its inevitability in software engineering, in the history of software engineering. So that should be interesting. And later on tonight, Findley's going to get here. He's got some engagements until about 7 o'clock, maybe even 7:45. So he's going to come in just before 8 o'clock and talk on Logstash. And if anything happens with his time, if he can't make it, if he has an urgency, I'm just gonna we'll cut it off early, and I'll defer that and reschedule that one. He's been trying to get out here, and he's had a couple obstacles in this way, so I really want to make it easy for him to give you some talk finally. Let's see what we got. Word here. All right, just went over that. I want to thank Greg, who is outstanding and extraordinary, and you as well for hosting us. They've been nothing but the best hosts you could wish for, and gracious. And I think Greg is really serious. Like, if you not asked for espresso, he might actually make it. Not sure, but this is what I'm talking about. Well, there you have it. Thanks, Greg. That's Timo, and Timo for providing space, of course. You can understand that. But if I didn't, I want to be clear. We're really having a great time meeting here, and everyone's talking about some basic side of it. It's great to be here. SG2, Susie, thank you very much. And Susan, of course, thank you for bringing the drinks and the beverages and the beer. It's absolutely awesome. So, cool. And CH Mobile's my floor. They give me time to do this, and are always supportive of ways for us to give back to the community. So I really appreciate that. We have a code of conduct. It's the same as previous times, but for those of you who haven't attended before, it's pretty much the same one as DevOps DC, and really, it's common sense. There's a lot of different people here from a lot of different places, a lot of different backgrounds, but everyone here is professional, and we should all speak to each other with common sense, respect, courtesy, and kindness. So please make sure you observe that. If you have any questions, check out the code of conduct. The link's up on the website. I'd love to ask you if anything is going on this month that you want to mention, bring up, or talk about as far as events, conferences, things like that. A conference you went to, or a conference you know is big and coming up.
Anybody going to CoreOS Fest?
CoreOS Fest. I'm not, but is anyone going to CoreOS Fest? No? Are you, Joe?
No, I got an invitation, but I'm not going.
Okay, cool.
Next month there is DevNation Federal in DC,
Okay.
which is Red Hat sponsored, along with a bunch of other places, Missouri and so on.
Yeah.
And I am presenting it, actually. One of the sessions is going to be, it's called DevNation, devnation.org, I think.
Okay.
And there's going to be a session called Log Aggregation and something patterns for containers. Something like that.
Awesome.
Anyway, but I'm doing that
Cool.
this session. So it should be, it might be interesting. It might be a little less.
In May, June?
June 8th.
June 8th.
Is that like the old Fosse conference that used to go on?
You remember that?
Oh, I hadn't thought of Fosse in ages. I don't know. That's a good question. I've never been to it, so.
I think it's June 14th. We're having Ruby Nation in Arlington.
Okay.
And there's also a web dev conference that Accela is holding with the theme of legacy system modernization. That's in June as well. Andy Hunt is keynoting that.
Okay.
Yeah, those are two big events I know.
Okay, cool, thanks. Would you guys mind sending that out either to the list on Slack, please, or on the Meetup channel if you're not on the Slack channel? That's probably my next slide here is probably to sign up to Slack. But thanks for that information. And let us know how it goes with your presentation, Doug. I'd love to hear about it.
Yep.
This kind of leads into that last comment that we've got a few things coming up in the near future, and next month, we're going to host a joint meetup with DevOps DC. We just started making arrangements and talking about this, so all the details aren't finalized, but we should have some good speakers. And also, it should be a great time hanging out with the crew at DevOps DC. So we're going to try to meet over in Arlington, I believe, at Accela for that. But I'll provide more details to the list, and I'll send something out as well so everyone everyone can show up, and that's just for June to do a nice big joint meetup event. And if you want to speak after June, say July or anytime later in this year, we'd love to have new speakers. I'm always looking for people to give talks, and if you're interested, even marginally interested, please, it's a great opportunity to try explaining to people something that you've been working on, or something that you think you're gonna have to practice for another conference, or you just have interest. Just send me a direct message if you're interested, or send an email to that address, or hit us up in Slack.
Cool.
Yeah.
We're all clear that DevOps Days DC is in July.
I don't know the date.
Yeah, so I think it's 17th-ish. I don't know.
That's pretty close to the third week, because I think
So it's
to your
also
point,
not
July
DC,
18th
it's in Tyson's at Capital One.
I think we should defer to that. If we have events, or we try to go. The meetup organizers try to go out of our way to, much to your point, to not coincide with other events or other meetups, so that people in the area can, take advantage and go to those meetups if they really want to go to. So we don't contend for, attendees or resources. So if that's the case, if it's that week, thanks, and I'll take a look.
Either I'll find the date, or
meeting.
someone will find the date and
Okay.
toss it out on email tonight or tomorrow.
Okay, if it's easy to reschedule, then we'll do that. And if
17th
not,
and 18th of July.
okay, we should probably, we might want to push out then till, if it's easy to reschedule, I'll put a poll out there or something like that. And if people want to do it maybe earlier or slightly later, we can try a different week. Otherwise, I'll just defer to August. I'll take a summer break or something like that.
Okay.
Cool, thanks guys. This is a time for announcements, and I'd love to call on a couple of different people, or anyone who has any openings they want to mention, any positions they want to talk about. So if you're hiring, if you have an opening, now's the time to speak up. Does anyone?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Matt Clark. I work with a local company by the name of Citizen, government contractor. We have an opening right now for a senior DevOps engineer. Very quick process. We have phone interview, in-person interview, and as soon as anyone can start. So if anyone knows anyone, anything like that, or if you're looking yourself, we've got business cards. I'll just leave a few here. So feel free.
Okay, and you're talking about Citizen. That's CITIZANT.
CANT. Yep. Based out of Chantilly, Virginia. So.
And what do you do on the team?
I'm the technical recruiter.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Okay, cool. So we have,
Full-time, long-term salary positions, great benefits, a lot
Okay.
of training and development, certifications are paid, tuition reimbursement, those sorts of things. So
Clearance?
so it's nice.
what's that?
Need for clearance?
It's in support of the Treasury, IRS, so you don't have to have one, but you will go through an MBI. Probably a month or two max, and you should be cleared. So green card or US citizen, either way.
Cool.
Yep.
Well, so if we have any questions, we can just send it to you.
Absolutely, yeah, here's my cards, feel free to take one, call me, email me, text me, anything.
Cool.
And I'll be here all night.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Matt.
Yep,
Appreciate
thank you.
it. Who else? Who's got a position open, or is anyone hiring? Go ahead, Dave.
So I'm talking, so maybe I should save it for them, but I'm the DevOps service area lead at Excella, and by the end of the year, I hope to build a team of 18 DevOps engineers at all levels, from entry level, believe it or not, we're looking at even GA grads, up to senior people. And,
All right.
I might be able to help you actually. I'm gonna have some lower level resumes that I found over the
Okay,
course.
cool.
So if you want to take a card or something, we can link
Yeah,
up.
it's amazing. We're not having much trouble finding the
Oh, I'm
junior
sure.
people.
I'm
You know,
sure.
it's, as I'll get to my talk, and my talk's not a commercial, but as I get to my talk, people find their way into DevOps. They don't, it's
Yeah.
not something people choose to do. It's like one day you wake up and no, I might get some DevOps engineer now. I'm sure we all have a moment like that.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for telling us about that.
They found a name for it.
Exactly. Right.
That seems pretty accurate. Susie?
Sorry.
No, don't hate to do it at all.
Give an update.
Please.
Hiring DevOps professionals, preferably years of Ansible, but not required, so any of the automation tool experience, passion for open source technology is sort of required, but we are open. So if you have any interest, please come see me.
That's awesome. Thank you. And you have, I think, do you still have 2 positions or more?
More than one.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
All right, Carl, I'll go now.
All right.
So
Go ahead.
I'm Greg, as everybody should know by now, since I like to talk. I work here at Atima. We are hiring. I didn't realize that we need a person with .NET experience, because we are usually focused very much on open source stuff. But if you're interested in learning more about what we do, we basically accelerate people into the cloud, the automation, and CI pipeline type stuff. So I'm happy to talk about it, either in person or offline if you're interested. So most roles are green card or US citizen.
How do we reach you? Well,
I have a card over here, so I will put a second card right here. You're welcome. It's very easy. It's Greg, G-R-E-G, @otimo.com. So
Cool.
you can copy hit me that way also.
And I think,
Thanks, Carl.
yeah, you got it. Thank you, Greg. And I think Greg's also on Slack as well. Or if anyone forgets how to get a hold of him and they're interested, just let me know and I'll put you guys in touch. See, I work for Stanford Mobile. We were looking for a senior PHP engineer. It is a PHP engineer job, but it would work closely with DevOps group. So there's some overlap there. And we're looking, I think the team is looking for folks who are working with, if you have experience with Docker or Ansible, it's a plus. It's a senior PHP engineering role. So if anyone has any questions on that, just reach out to me. If you have any interest or know someone who could be a fit, I'd love to hear about it. We've got a pretty great team. Let's see. Okay, so is anyone looking for work that wants to raise their hand or call themselves out or anything? All right, we got one. Can you introduce yourself?
This is Ashok. I recently graduated my master's from Northwest Missouri State University. I'm actually recruiting.
Okay, cool. Yeah. What are you looking for work in specifically?
So I have a certification in AWS. I'm just cleared the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate. Okay. So I'm actually very much interested to work in cloud and DevOps.
Okay.
So I do have some knowledge in Bock and
okay, cool.
Chef.
Okay, awesome.
Might be a guy right there. You look for. There you go.
And I also know someone at AWS who might be hiring as well. So just talk to one of us afterwards and remind us or reach out afterwards after the meeting. If not, anyone else? Okay. All right. Let's keep going. Let's. Is anyone talking at any conferences that they want to point out? I think we've already covered that, so I was going to blow right past that. But if anyone else didn't get a chance, you want to? Yeah, please.
It's not going to be a small, it's not going to be a big conference, but I will be doing a presentation about DNS and DNSSEC next. Could you remind me the date? June 10th.
June 10th.
For the NoVA group.
Oh, awesome! That's fantastic. Very cool.
It's going to be announced on Meetup, so you can catch that.
Okay, very cool. And if I'm not mistaken, will that be live streamed?
All of NoVA Logs meetings are live streamed.
That is so cool.
So I run the Northern Virginia Linux Users Group. We've been around since October of 1993. Yes, 24 years. And Doug spoke this month in stream, but we usually stream it. We meet Saturday mornings, currently at the Red Hat space in McLean. The meetings have pretty much been streamed consistently for the last 2 years. So if 10 a.m. is too early for you to get yourself from McLean, as long as you can see some flashy device, you can stream it from the comfort of your location. Very cool. All right. Hope that goes well. Love to hear about it afterwards. Well, I think that's it for these are the links you might need to know to keep in touch. But I think we should get into the exciting presentation. I've got David up first, and I just wanted to thank you again for coming out, hanging out, and introducing yourselves to each other. And let's hand it over to David. Everybody should find the Wi-Fi if you haven't yet. It's DevOps Meetup. It's pretty quick. There's a splash screen. I don't have to splash screen to say it or not, but we're not capturing anything. So.
No, I just needed to. Do you mind if I come back?
I want you to, definitely.
To not block the so just need to Nope, good.
Close.
Close enough. Okay, so as I already mentioned, I'm David Bock. I'm the DevOps Service Area Lead at Excella Consulting. And I'm going to hopefully say something new tonight. Actually, before I go to that slide, I know if you ask 5 DevOps engineers what DevOps is, you'll get between 6 and 10 different answers. But I have some material that I connect this to that has a historical legacy that I think is going to make a lot of useful sense. Before I talk about that, though, I want to mention my nonprofit. I live out in Loudoun County, and 2 years ago, I started Loudoun Codes, which is a nonprofit organization for teaching K-12 computer science education. And yeah, I'm involved in several different schools, have several other volunteers. I was hoping some of my students would make it out tonight, but you know, when you're in high school and out in Loudoun County, Reston's tough to get to. So maybe they're watching live stream. So hey guys. Talk is about a history of software engineering. Before we get into, and how that led to DevOps, but before we get into that, I want to play a little game. We're going to play Identify the Old Timer. And everybody is going to get to play along with this. Where's the game? There we go. So if you go to Kahoot.it and type in that number on a cell phone or some other Wi-Fi device, you'll be able to play along. And this will just take a few minutes, but I hope to learn something about the audience and see if you follow the pattern of other groups I've given this talk to. There we go. Kenzie's on.
4, 5, 7, 0.
Matt. So if you're playing along with the home game, you can do this too. It's Kahoot.it, KHHOOT.IT, and the number is 457-0900. Again, that's 457-0900. All right, we're getting some people. I'll give you another 30 seconds or so.
If you can't get on there, you probably automatically know the timer.
That's right. Ironically, you'd probably do better at this if you can't get on. Okay, what do you say we play? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So here we go. We're going to have 20 seconds to answer. Who's this person? Franz Schubert, Charles Babbage, Leonard Euler, or Johann Sebastian Bach? All right. 8 people got that right. Surprised, normally people get the composers right. So who's that? Dennis Ritchie, John Cage, Edgar Dykstra, or John McCarthy? John McCarthy. Let's see how people did. Whoa! Wow. Okay, do either one of those 2 people want to tell us who John McCarthy is, why he's famous?
Yes, right.
He's basically the creator of Lisp, big name in the history of computer science. And we did worse than chance. Okay, so who's this one? Grace Hopper, Barbara Liskov, Radia Perlman, or Anita Borg? All right, we're getting better. Still, Grace Hopper, come on. I would have had her in a Navy uniform before Grace Hopper. So Barbara Liskov is known for the Liskov substitution principle, one of the L in solid, the object-oriented principles that we talk about all the time. Okay, so who's this? Claude Shannon, Charles Babbage, Amadeus Mozart, or Claude Debussy? All right. Doing better with the composers than people in our own field. Okay, we're halfway. Okay, who's this? Nicholas Worth, Alan Kay, E.F. Codd, or Don Newt?
Name tags?
I was gonna say, I'm giving this one to you. I'm giving this one to you. All right. Well, come on, there was a name tag, people. There was a name tag. Okay, Doug, you're winning here.
Killing it. Thanks.
Doug is definitely the oldest.
Thank you, Greg.
Okay, Vince Cerf, Dennis Ritchie, Ken Thompson, or Nicholas Worth? Oh, come on, Vince Cerf.
So if you were at NoVA at any point, you would have met Mr. Cerf. He came.
Oh, really? Oh, awesome.
They talked to us about the IP protocol he was setting up to talk to Mars.
Yeah,
lazy with Bock.
his work makes
for talking to Mars.
Yeah, his work makes everything we're doing right now absolutely possible, including your cell phones talking to this game to record the score that you voted wrong on for him. Okay. Almost there. Who's this one? Clara Schumann, Sandra Kemp, Anita Borg, or Margaret Hamilton?
It's like a weird Barbara Corcoran.
Anita Borg. Wow. Okay.
And she's a board.
Yes, she is a Borg. No, the Anita Borg Institute that holds the ADA, the big conference every year. Ada Lovelace? Well, I'm sorry, the Grace Hopper, the big conference with Grace Hopper. Okay, and here's a gimme. Who's this? Louise Ferré or Lady Ada Lovelace? Composer from the same era or Lady Lovelace? It's the composer. Come on. Okay, so my point here is that from a historical perspective, fun little game, but from a historical perspective, we can all do a heck of a lot better by knowing the actual, like, people in our own industry. In my misspent youth, I spent a few years as a music major in college, and we studied music history, right? Every semester there was some music history period we studied. Software engineering is getting to the depth of field that we could do the same kind of thing, and we're not yet. That's kind of my point there. And that's kind of the point of this talk. First of all, I mentioned that I volunteer and teach a little bit of high school, so I'm giving you all a homework assignment. You will not regret investigating this. This is a video that's up on YouTube. There was a series that was on the Science Channel called Moon Machines. And this was a 6-episode show all about the equipment that went to the moon. So it's a moon story, but it's not about the heroes that we typically see. This is about the Saturn V rocket and the moon landers. And there is an entire episode dedicated to the navigation computer. And this, to me, they talk about what is probably the birth of software engineering, at least the software engineering pain points we're familiar with. Because they talk about how NASA specified the size of the hole the computer had to fit into and the weight of the computer, but they didn't tell them what it actually had to do besides land on the moon, right? The requirements were vague. And the story here about these engineers and their lives is absolutely amazing. It's up on YouTube, and it's absolutely worth spending an hour investigating. Another hour that is worth investigating is Glenn Vanderburg's talk about real software engineering. I'm going deeper on one particular topic of his, but he talks into how we have this weird dilemma in that in most engineering disciplines, engineering is reserved for the terms that actually work. And for what we teach in college about, waterfall process, and I have a student that's in college now taking UML diagramming, and I don't know how many of you actually use UML all that much anymore, but there's a place for it, but we don't actually study as an engineering discipline the processes that actually work. And he goes into this in quite detail in this talk and why that's true. In fact, he goes back to the first software engineering conference that was held by NATO in 1969, where he describes how that conference was amazingly self-aware of what software engineering was and what it wasn't, what they had to do as a field. By 1970, the conference had a different air, and I'll save that for you that investigate that talk. But one of the things that came out of the conference in 1970 is the paper that we generally identify with the waterfall process. It's by Winston Royce, and this is the paper that is generally credited with defining waterfall. And let's take a look at just the diagrams, because this is the point that Glenn makes in that talk. Right? Analysis and coding, very naive approach, right? We figure out what we're going to code, then we code it. But let's settle down on the diagrams. We have this one up here. System requirements to software requirements to analysis to program design to coding, testing, operations. Looks familiar, right? Mm-hmm. This is waterfall in a nutshell, but the diagrams go a lot farther. It talks about feedback loops. Design iterations are never confined to successive steps. Well, that's interesting. Now imagine somebody comes back from this conference, you're a manager, they plop this paper on your desk. The problem is this paper is written in an academic tone, not a business tone. It's not very approachable from a business standpoint. So you skim, you look for the diagrams. Well, that's getting a little complex. It seems like each step has a bunch of stuff that falls out of it. Okay, whoa. Okay, there's a lot of documents and specs we're going to need to write about that. And let's see. Okay, more stuff is generated. Whoa. And this one is called summary. Right? So his point is that, as a manager who's used to building stuff in a waterfall pipeline, I look at this. This makes a lot of sense. That's what we're going to go with. The shocking thing is the paper from 1970. I believe in this concept, but the implementation described above is risky and invites failure. And he goes on to talk about the iterations that are necessary between all those cycles. In 1970, he's talking about agile software development. That's what this paper's about. But most of the industry missed it. And we were sidetracked for 30 years, right, before we started talking about Scrum and XP and agile development. Fascinating time. I want to focus in, though, on coding and testing. I started my career in 1992 here in Reston. And I had an interesting story. I was a software guy working at a hardware company. And software was always the thing downstream that shipped late, right? The reason the hardware didn't ship. And I got on this bent with my boss about we need to do more testing. We need to test more of our software. So this is 1992, 1993. My boss came back from Macworld that year with a T-shirt for me that said, "Beta testing is for sissies." And that says something about the culture of testing in the day. It also says something about the culture in general in 1993 that someone would wear a shirt like that. But the point is that early days of software engineering, like 1983, not too early, but early days of my career, testing was not something that engineers did. Testing was something that happened downstream, right? If it happened at all. My next job, also here in Reston, where the Northern Virginia Java user group used to meet, we had a QA department. And that seemed like a luxury to me, right? That, wow, you mean there are people there that are actually going to test the work I do before it goes out and suddenly you have to, ship a new floppy or burn a new CD? That's awesome. In reality, there are some issues there. In that, of course, software always runs later than scheduled, right? But the customer wants the date to be the same. So whose schedule gives? Testing, right? Testing, tests our stuff and finds stupid errors because we're rushing and we're panicked and features changed and, because we weren't doing our own unit testing back in that day. So we're getting off by 1 errors, null pointer exceptions, stupid stuff that we could have easily fixed. While I was at that job, the culture, over the 11 years I was there, the culture of testing changed. We started doing unit tests, right? What testing became leveled up, right? We were doing more unit tests, more integration tests. We would catch our own regressions much earlier. We automated that stuff, so when somebody committed something, we would see it as a problem immediately. And the relationship to testing changed quite a bit. Suddenly, testing was not catching our stupid errors. Testing was catching, it was translated into several different languages, so they would catch weird translation errors. They would catch one-offs in the business flow of the logic, not the null pointer exceptions, but like this business logic doesn't make sense. Are you sure that's what the customer wanted? This user interface could be cleaner, right? It became more of an acceptance test and a validation of the requirements than, you know, did you have a stupid typo in your code that causes an error? Coding and testing leveled up together. And really what started that for me, it had been happening. You know, the book The Pragmatic Programmer came out, talked about this stuff in 1999. And after The Pragmatic Programmer came out, the two people who wrote that, Andy Hunt and Dave Thomas, spun up their own small publishing company. And they published these 3 books: Pragmatic Version Control, Pragmatic Unit Testing, and Pragmatic Project Automation. Looking back from the perspective today, that seems an awful lot like the things that we focus on with DevOps, doesn't it? I mean, the only thing really missing there is virtualization and the culture. But still, interesting times, right? Unit testing was born in this book. This is the first book I know about where the entire book is dedicated to the subject of automation. Yeah, it might have been in chapters. It was certainly in Prog earlier. But this is the first time I saw a book that was dedicated to it. So this culture of testing was important. A lot of important stuff happened. At the same time, we're shedding waterfall. We're figuring out agile software development. XP was around, Scrum was around. A bunch of things we don't hear about anymore, like Crystal Family, or these agile methodologies we were looking. But you know what? Looking at Scrum here, built into Scrum is this term, the potentially shippable product increment. I contend that we chickened out, right? Here's the problem that Scrum faced. Developers want this, right? We're iterating every 2 weeks, and we're ready to ship every 2 weeks. We run into the CIO in the organization who says, I can't have you deploying that every 2 weeks. We deploy once every 3 months, and I feel like my job is on the line for 2 weeks at a time. I can't imagine the stress of doing that every 2 weeks, right? So Scrum said, okay, you know what, we'll back off. That work can accumulate. The idea is that we have a potentially shippable product, and then we'll come up with a release plan that ships once every 3 months to make the CIO happy. This is a chicken out, right? Now, looking at what DevOps has become today, I can sit here and talk about what that means, right? In fact, I have a great story I will tell at the end. A student of mine that interns at a large university. But we'll talk about Scrum in a second. That potentially shippable product increment, we chickened out. So I want to talk now about what's happening here. We have this coding and testing loop. DevOps is that same pattern happening again, right? Before, we took coding and testing, and developers took a lot of what testing was and made it part of development. As a result, we leveled up what testing was about. We're now taking a lot of what operations is about, automating it, configuration as code, virtualization, blue-green deployments. All that stuff we're doing is beginning to take operations and making a lot of that a DevOps responsibility. So what's going to happen to what's going to happen to operations? In the same sense, operations is leveling up. The operations people are left to build commodity. They are now focused on things like security. By the same token, when operations is no longer worried about the cabling of wires, at least in a sense of the corporation, because they're offloading that to someplace like Amazon, they can focus more on the business needs of operation. One of the first books that really started talking about what DevOps was, it didn't call it that, was Ship It. This is about overcoming that CIO barrier of having to deploy every with potentially shippable software products, having to deploy every 3 months. That's getting to be a dated book. Another book that talks about this is Continuous Delivery. Really elevates the concept of what we can do with version control and automated testing and all of this stuff to have a pristine, the customer says ship and we can ship it now. The customer says demo and we can demo it now. And of course, Amazon Web Services has been a huge piece of this puzzle because before, with physical infrastructure, it is expensive to have a rack that's $100,000 and then another rack that's $100,000 sitting beside it as spare and idle, right? Imagine if I went to my boss in 2008, well, let's go back a little earlier, 2003, and said, you know what? We really want to be able to do this cool thing where we have a hot spare of our application. And when we do a deploy, we'll actually deploy onto that hot spare. And then once we know it's good over there, we'll reroute all traffic over that spare and shut down the other one. He's like, that's great, but I don't have a spare 100 grand to duplicate our data center. Right? Amazon Web Services has changed those large capital expenditures that had to be upfront into recurring operational expenditures, which gives us new capabilities. Now, when I first saw Amazon Web Services, I misunderstood that because I saw it as costing a lot more for the same equivalent of a bare metal machine, or cost per performance was different. What I didn't get initially was the value add of not having that initial investment, right? Of being able to stand it up whenever I need to tear it back down. What I'm describing there, we now call blue-green deployment, where if I have my entire infrastructure in version control and I can rebuild it on a click, well, I can stand up a new copy of that virtual infrastructure, run all my tests, have my client bang on it, have my QA department bang on it for a day, whatever it takes to prove that it's real, and then just move traffic over. Goes for a little while, we're happy with that, and once we're happy, we shut down the old. That enables new business capabilities too, which if I have the time, I'll get into a little bit. Remind me of that, I will tell you some of the business capabilities that we enabled at Living Social with that kind of attitude, with being able to do A/B testings on our business logic. So this is what DevOps to me is about. It's about this confluence of our agile software development practices. The automation and the virtualization are coming together to drive forward into the next bubble down that chart, the culture of agile software development. Phoenix Project talks about this book quite a bit. Who's read it? Right. This should be required reading for everybody in this room. So now 3 homework assignments. Go watch those 2 videos, read this book. People who have read it, do you agree? Or was it fluff? Okay, absolutely. Okay.
It's a novel for those who don't know. It's a novel. It's not a...
Yeah, I should tell. Yeah, let me explain that book a little bit. It is a piece of fiction. It's kind of a business fiction. I've heard someone refer to this kind of stuff as business erotica. And the 5 dysfunctions of a team, all those books are like this too, where it's a fictional account and the protagonist in the book is a DevOps engineer, somebody who's promoted into senior levels of management and uses the philosophies of lean management and agility and a few other ideas all related to DevOps to basically turn the company around. Now, the problem is...
Put a thing on there. It's real life enough that I took a long time to read it because it was so annoying to come home after working in an environment like that. You read the same thing.
It's sad because it's true kind of thing.
Not reading that now.
So let's talk a little bit about the culture of ops. Who here is an ops person by trade? Okay, I'm going to try not to offend you.
Thank you.
But there is a certain culture in ops where people are so proud of the work they do. You can find pages on the internet called cable porn, where they just take pictures of the beautiful racks they build and post them up online. And I don't blame them. There's pride in that kind of stuff. I ran the cabling in my house when it was under construction. It does not look that nice. I have built a little Docker swarm out of 8 Raspberry Pis, and I was meticulous about putting all the wires and everything because I wanted it to be like a showpiece of stuff. But to tell people that respect the physicality of their work so much that it's almost an art, to say, yeah, that's all going away. It's going to be a YAML file in version control. That's hard. I mean, not that this work is entirely going away, but every company is not going to need their own, custom data center like this anymore. A lot of the stuff is moving into the purview of up and down the Greenway in Loudoun, all the data centers that belong to Amazon and other companies. Those jobs will still exist, but a lot of the physicality and customness of this is going to go away because it's going to be configuration tools. And there's definitely a certain cultural sensitivity and awareness to be there. I want to talk about this dynamic as well. Just like we had this dynamic between development and QA, we have this dynamic between development and operations. Development is all about new features, changing code, new custom requirements, proud of their work, wanting to get it into production. Ops is all about uptime and stability and managing that change and making sure stuff doesn't break. And so we have this tension here between change and stability. And there's a culture clash. And in the best organizations, this can be a problem. I mentioned briefly the 5 dysfunctions of a team. In that book, one of the 5 dysfunctions is this concept of a team not having constructive conflict. And we're set up for positive constructive conflict here in a healthy organization, in that both groups have the same goal, but we have different missions, competing missions in achieving that goal. Even in a healthy organization, there's going to be a little bit of, wait, you can't deploy that now. Oh, we really need to get this out, kind of discussion that needs to achieve the greater good towards the goal. In an organization that has some unhealthiness around this, you're going to see those damn ops people never know how to get our stuff into deployment without breaking it. Those damn development people don't understand anything about what we need in terms of logging to support this thing. And there's clash there. So by fulfilling what the mission of DevOps is, we need to lower this wall. And a lot of what operations is going to become the version-controlled DevOps resources in places like Amazon. What's going to be left for operations to do is leveling up on things like the infrastructure, the security, the business need, business goal, all that kind of stuff. So there's a tension here that has to be managed, and this is really the role of management as we go through this next step in the whole process. So we have this agility, the different mechanisms I was talking about for all the different. Scrum is the famous one, XP, Crystal Family, Kanban, Andy Hunt's new thing that he's promoting called Grows. All that falls here. We have the automation, which is everything that we do now with from build tools going back to Make, to things like Rake, to what we do with Travis and CI and Jenkins and all that stuff up here in automation. Virtualization, everything we do at Amazon and Azure and whoever else, and the hybrid stuff we build, because our data center is not necessarily going away. All of that stuff converges in the center here with DevOps. That's where we've been heading for 30 years, and a substantial portion of that was predicted in that Royce paper. So that's the end of my slides, but I promised I was going to tell you a story. This is the story, at least I think I might have even said 2. This is the story that I used to tell the skeptical manager about DevOps, and all of you are free to quote it. I have a high school student that for the past 2 years has been interning at a large, I'm not going to use their name, but it's a large online presence for continuing education, both in a public university system and military systems. The military, degree systems online. Something like 60,000 students. Last February, he saw me one morning at school. He came and he goes, Mr. Bock, I had the best weekend. I have to tell you what I did. I was like, what'd you do? He was like, well, we had a big deployment at work. We're prepping for the summertime enrollment, and we had to ship out a new version of our software. So I was up all Saturday night with the team deploying it. And I was like, really? This is your idea of fun? He's like, I can see that to a high school student, first real gig, having some fun. It was, at about 2 a.m., we had a problem bringing the database back up. Well, the database was up, but there was a connection problem with the existing app. We had no idea what was wrong. And, we traced it back in version control, and we found the developer who did this database upgrade back. But he wasn't around. He was at home asleep. We were considering waking him up. We were figuring out if it was even possible to roll back to deploy the new stuff so we could try to handle it next weekend. When somebody found the problem, it was a typo in a configuration file. Somebody had just put QL instead of SQL in the URL to the server. And he told me that story. And I said, you young Padawan are ready to learn about DevOps. And so I interrogated him a little bit. I was like, okay, so tell me about the servers. He's like, it's a rack, probably cost a small fortune. They had to take down the old server, start to infect it with all their new stuff, and then bring it back up. It's the typical plan, right? And I said, now imagine, so last October, November, they did a deploy for the winter enrollment classes. And of course, what's the next thing that developers did? They took on a bunch of high-risk stuff that they had been putting off, like database upgrades. Some developer made a database upgrade, changed the configuration file. Here's a file that's only ever used in production, made a typo. It sat there in version control for months, right? Until a different team, months later, ran into it trying to deploy. So first of all, the person who made the typo isn't there, right, at 2 a.m. Second of all, even if he was there, he made that typo 4 months ago. He's not going to remember, oh, right, that's probably the... So now imagine if instead of waiting 4 months to execute that in production because we have this physical server rack here, all that was hosted in AWS. Even if it cost a little bit more comparatively operational expenditure, there wasn't the huge capital expenditure up front. And now the developer, when they made that change, instead of checking it in and waiting 4 months to see that file, what if they had automated tests that re-provisioned that whole environment, ran a complete test suite against it? Maybe not immediately when they checked it in, maybe then that evening. He would come in the next morning to see a failed build, blah, blah, blah. He'd go, what's that about? Oh, right, okay, I could go check the 7 files I modified. It's a typo, right? And fixed, and it would be done. 4 months later, his deploy, okay, let's start it at 9:30. Okay, 10 o'clock, we're done. See y'all later, right? It would have been so much faster, so much cleaner. And now, I mentioned that mitigating that risk of the CIO. Well, imagine if we're that confident in our work that we can test it every so often. Why wait 3 months? Right? The CIO instinct is to hold back on work because of the stress associated with deploying it. We flip that around. The stress is now in holding back work because we won't be able to diagnose it when it actually goes wrong. We need to deploy more often. And that's the next big hurdle that we need to start selling for DevOps is the culture change around the management practices of mitigating that kind of risk. There was another talk another thing I was going to mention. Did you take a note on that? I saw you write something down when I said it.
I did not.
Okay.
Just the books.
Just the books. So anyway, that's my talk. This is a historical perspective on what DevOps is and I think how we've gotten where we are, looking back to really a misunderstanding of advice that was given to us in 1970, following through on what really started in the 90s when we woke up to what that advice should have been, started doing more testing, more automation. Virtualization in 2007 made this more of a reality, and now the tooling and everything else is coming along. The biggest problem we have isn't deciding whether it should be Ansible, Puppet, Chef, or something else, or Amazon, or our own VMware instance, or Azure. Those are all just tools that, 2 years from now, we'll be arguing over a different set of tools. It's the culture shift that will enable the fact that we can even use those tools in the first place is the stuff that we need to do now. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, this has been recorded, right?
Oh,
yeah.
So I haven't published the slides, but at this point I could. The problem is my slides are, the slides without the talk are kind of, meaningless.
Is that paper available?
Yeah. If you just search for a Royce waterfall, you'll find that paper. Yeah. And again, it's very enlightening, but it's the kind of academic paper that you read in like the Papers We Love group. It's not something you read as like, here's some business advice.
Yeah, no, I do teach a course on DevOps, and I talk about waterfall and say this is kind of move to Agile. So one of the things I think about in this in that timeline is also the computing power that's available, and how that has impacted software development practices.
Right. I saw you mentioned the computing power that's available to us today. I saw a picture on Twitter the other day that was a room full of like antique TRS-80s and Apple IIs and all this stuff, and a Roomba sweeping the floor. And somebody said the Roomba has more power than all the computers in the warehouse put together. It's pretty amazing. I have this little 8-board Raspberry Pi Docker swarm I built. And that is so cool to see that. You just fire stuff off to it and it fires up and goes.
Do you want to mention something else? You said at the very beginning that you might mention something about openings or hiring.
Oh yeah, we covered that in the opening. To put that into some context, this talk is actually like the first 45 minutes of a week-long training course that we're doing for our DevOps bootcamp. Within every service area at Excella, we take like the last 10 people that have been hired in that group every now and then and give them a boot camp. And so this is part of our boot camp, just kind of an orientation to who we are as a company and our consulting practices and our methodologies and philosophies.
So your Excella employees do the boot camp?
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
Well, thanks. Do you guys want to take a 5-minute bathroom break right now? Get some water, whatever else.
Where's the bathroom at?
Back in 5 minutes.
The bathroom is across the hall.
Across the hall.
So just, literally go across the hall to the.
Well, Bill's here. Thank you. Hey, Bill. This is Bill Findley. Hello. Thanks for making it. I hope you weren't waiting outside too long. I appreciate that.
Everything's whoa. Cool. Slick. All right. So this is just a lighthearted introduction to a delightful piece of software that makes my life easier. Logstash.
Awesome.
Yeah. So who's done this kind of bullshit? Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that great? Because it's not just one server. You do that, and that's just one server, but your boss says, how do the other servers look? And yeah, I can't do that, I'm sorry. I can't get you a report in 15 minutes. Yeah, sorry. You gotta level up your game. Grep and Awk just don't scale. They're fine tools, but in their place.
Perl does that.
So, that is a whole bunch of web server logs. That's not usable by a pointy-haired boss. Something like this may be a little more usable, but this, now this is something that he understands. These are all the return codes over time, and in this case, we're returning a whole bunch of 404s, so that's probably bad. In this case, it's actually not, but that's because we run behind a CDN. So these are the syslogs from our entire fleet. We can actually look at them, and I can see, in this case, that some knucklehead is sudoing the same thing over and over again, and I can go have a friendly discussion with him about how to maybe do things a little bit better. So Logstash is software, but it's got a lot of history. Well, let's back up. It's developed by this guy named Jordan Sissel. It's written in Ruby, but it's executed in a Java JVM. And a while back ago, Elasticsearch hired Jordan Sissel and Rashid Khan, who created Kibana, which is the thing that you were looking at previously. It's the visualization. So you can imagine Logstash is just a pipeline of processing log events. And the start of the pipeline is an input. And the most basic of inputs is, let's watch a file. In this case, we've provided a path. You can do other things. You can listen on a TCP port or a UDP port. Or, if you want to get really fancy, you could have a messaging queue, like Kafka or RabbitMQ. sending things, and there's lots and lots of inputs. This is where the power comes in, though, because what you can do is you can take that unstructured log data, things like client IPs, the return codes, the path that they query, the verb, all those things, and you can parse all that stuff out using a really fun little regular expression language called Grok. And you'll see here, I wish I had my laser pointer, but I don't. So this is a pre-baked regular expression that will parse a common Apache log format. And then you output it. And this is why Elasticsearch bought them, because they saw that they had a whole bunch of people. Oh, fantastic, thank you. So they saw that they had a whole bunch of people using their product for a purpose that they had no, they didn't actually intend their product to use for. So they're no dummies, so they decided to they decided to hire Jordan Sissel and Rashid Khan, and they had this whole software project. So Logstash is really just a grab bag of tools, inputs, filters, outputs that you can put together any way you like. I'd like to show you a way that I like to put them together. So this is, remember I said that when we look at a Logstash event, really a log event is just something that happened at a specific time, and there's some stuff. It can be anything, really, but it's usually some discrete types of things, and then the values. So it's just basically key value things. And these things can get serialized right into Elasticsearch. So remember that when we were viewing those events, we needed to view them on time. And I don't know if you've ever encountered timestamps in a variety of formats, but it's just horrible. You get it all over the place, and so, oops, oh, this. Jordan Sissel had this slide, and I really, really like it. Logstash has, in the same way that it has Grok, it has this filter that lets you parse shitty timestamps and turn them into something standard. And the standard, in this case, is ISO 9000, or ISO, yeah.
8601.
8601, yeah, sure, that thing. What happened here? Anyway, you should indeed stop inventing shitty time formats. What happened? Yeah. Okay. So here is one event. Why did I say that? Is my mouse not working? What on earth is this? This is not my presentation. I'm so sorry, people. This is Jordan Sissel's presentation. No wonder. I must have accidentally clicked on his presentation.
That's pretty good. It looked exactly like it. It was appropriate. That's pretty good.
I don't know how long should I better.
Crying out loud. Well, let's stop doing that, please.
Oh, so there's a reference to his
I clicked on. I clicked on his link. So, in the same way that Grok has thing, I already told you about that. Okay. So here's a little bit more about Grok. Remember I said that the common Apache combined Apache log is a handy canned regular expression. That regular expression is composed of other canned regular expressions. So the common thing and then some other junk. In this case, QS stands for quoted string. And then, you know, they've got this goofy regular expression IP or host. Now, anyone who has maintained a really good regular expression that handles lots of cases knows that it's a pain in the neck. So that's where a lot of the value of this Grok comes from, is that it has proven regular expressions that you can use to parse your stuff. So here is the elk stack. This is a little bit of a goofy picture that I put together. This is how I like to run it in production. So I have I have a server with a whole bunch of logs, and they have a very slim little product called FileBeat that will watch those logs and then send them over SSL to Logstash processes, and then they will put them in Elasticsearch, and then you spin up Kibana to point at the Elasticsearch, and there you go. Your users can look at their logs. Elasticsearch, I don't know if any of you have ever spun it up, but it really is a fun thing to use. As far as distributed databases go, it's not too bad to run, as long as you don't let it get too big. But for a typical organization, you put all of your logs into a single day's worth of indexes, and then you can easily prune your logs according to whatever your retention policy is. One other thing that you should know is that the free version of Elasticsearch has absolutely no authentication. So if you live or work in a place where you need to worry about that sort of thing, then you need to worry about that sort of thing. There are ways to do it, but it's just there's actually a commercial thing that they would love to sell you. It's called Elasticsearch Shield, and then there's another product that tries to compete with it that's free, and there's stuff. Come talk to me after if you really need to. So Kibana is the web front end. It also runs on Java. Actually, no, I might be wrong. It used to run on Java. Now it runs in Go. Anyhow, the point is that is the web front end. You point it at an Elasticsearch, and it lets you do some things. Now comes the dangerous part of the show, where I try and probably fail to do a live demo.
It's part of a live demo.
So
we learned from you.
I have. Oh dear, I was hoping this would have been spun up by now. Let's take a look.
Record time. You already broke it.
Okay.
I jinxed yourself with that slide.
I did. Oh, great. There's a thing. And I forgot what I needed to click on, so I had to go look at the README. Hooray! It's broken. So, if things had been working properly, I would have not had a busy day at work, and I would have worked on this. But I will show you what I have. And we'll just go with that. Actually, no, we won't. We will acknowledge that we have broken things. So, yeah. Now, Grok is great, but this thing that I showed you way back, maybe, that pipeline. In this pipeline, where I run in production, I don't actually run Grok on these indexers. They just get raw JSON from the source. And the reason for that is because maintaining a regular expression, even when it's made of composable parts, still sucks. Because if your developers decide that they want to change logging formats and not tell you, then they will complain that the handy-dandy log portal that you created for them that no longer works, and you have to figure it out. So the other thing is that the application already knows what the data elements are. Why throw away that knowledge and output into unstructured text? Let's just output as JSON in the first place. Now, you still have Grok if you need it, because if you need to output logs from, say, a third-party system that you can't change the logging format, or a network device, or anything like that, where you have to have unstructured text, you can still deal with it, and you can process it and understand it. So here are some handy ways to get, for instance, Apache to output as JSON. We can say, give me a timestamp that looks like ISO 8601, and we can tag it with some words that maybe make sense, so that when we search for these events, we know what they are, and then we can get all the bits and pieces out right at the source. You can do that for all sorts of other things. This is almost verbatim what I run in production for outputting system logs. I have our syslog outputting natively JSON and just sending to this little tiny file, messages logstash.json. It truncates after about 250 megs. It's very kind of a silly way to do it. There's probably a more elegant thing to do, where maybe I send it to a network port or something like that, but this works for me. I'm a simple man, I have simple needs. There's some other things. In case you're a Java shop, you might run log4j, and you can have a layout that will make all those log4j events into Logstash JSON, or if you're a modern Java shop, you might run logback. And this is what we run at work. We output all of our Cassandra logs using logback, and it has all the bits and pieces there. It's really handy, especially for Cassandra, because that's a distributed database. And if you want to understand the state of that distributed database, you need to look at whole bunches of systems. So having them all in one place is handy. This is old, don't pay attention to it.
Quick question for you.
Yeah.
If you can go back like 2 slides.
Sure,
to
man.
your log, this thing. Down there you have encoder class net logstash, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Is that something actually provided by Logstash?
No. With this right here is actually like a Java class right here that you get from Maven. And I think it is actually maintained by Elasticsearch,
Okay.
but it is a Java class that what I then do is I have it in the class path when I run Cassandra, and then it's available as a encoder for logback. So that's pretty much it. I think Logstash is awesome. It's really handy because if I'm a systems administrator, I don't want to be getting between information and people unless there's a good business reason for it. And logs, I think, should just generally be available in an easy to consume format. I don't want people to come up to me and say, what do the logs say? And then I type some things into my terminal screen and I show them what the logs say. That's kind of crappy because I'm then a human keyboard. I'm an input device for somebody else. I'd rather give them the power. In case you didn't know, the guy who wrote Logstash is really an awesome systems administrator. He's not just on Logstash. He has a great attitude. One of the reasons that the Logstash project is as fabulous as it is because this, for a long time, was his sig line every time he posted to the mailing list. And I think that is a great attitude because software is for people. It's not just for computers. And if a community can't support the people, then that is a problem with the software, the entire project. He also wrote some really angry things. He wrote a Ruby script called FPM, which stands for fucking package management. He also wrote, so it lets you make packages across a whole bunch of platforms using one script. So you can make like a deb, an RPM, all sorts of things. And then this is probably not as relevant anymore since systemd has taken over the world, but at one point he wrote please run that will generate init scripts in a variety of formats. And I don't know, he's just a really awesome dude. He's done a lot of really interesting work. And that's my talk.
All right.
If anyone has any questions or wants to show me where I screwed up my live demo, that'd be fine.
Do you know anyone who's using or are you using Logstash to collect analytic type data, page views?
Yeah, the company I work for, that's our business. We have an entirely different product that does that. So at my workplace, my main business goal for running Logstash is just to expose, like, by the at the second logs to developers, so they don't have to SSH in the systems. But yeah, you could totally do that. That first slide that I showed you, let's see, the one with the graphs that showed. Yeah, the one that showed how page views were sucking. Yeah. You can turn all these visualizations within Kibana. You can turn into like pie charts and things. You can do even there's a filter within Logstash that lets you assign latitude and longitude to client IPs as they come into your weblog, so you can understand geographically what your audience might be. All sorts of interesting things you can do with your data once you get it into a pipeline like this. Yeah.
Have you played around with the stats? Does it handle the protocol like SISD?
It does. There is a kind of a funny way to make metrics come out of your logs. So you could say, there are, I will try to drop a blog post or two into the chat, but there are ways to make, for instance, your return codes for your web service go into StatsD, so you can see like a what's the thing? Account, not account. Histogram of the various return codes over time.
Things like analytics and stats protocol, metrics protocols like StatsD. Am I trying to fit square peg in a round?
No, you're not. There's all sorts of extracting metrics from your logs is a perfectly valid use case, and yeah, there's an entire metrics filter and output that you can use with Logstash.
So not
No, it's a really excellent idea and use case. Yeah. In the black shirt first. You raised your hand first.
Is Logstash comparable to Splunk?
It is very comparable to Splunk. Do you know what it's not comparable to Splunk in? Money. Yeah. Splunk is really spending.
But do people ever like clickstream data from websites, there's certain websites that track every event you do as you're on the website?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a use case that people clickstream data?
That's kind of the business that I, my company is in, Oracle Data Cloud. We have kind of clickstream data. The company I used to work at this. We have a little widget that's on a bazillion websites. And when you get into something that critical to your business, you probably want to build something purpose-built, probably with Hadoop. Or we built a goofy thing that SSHs things around called Hydra, and it's a pain in the neck, but somebody else maintains it mostly. So, but if you're building a business that needs to understand data on that kind of scale, and if it has that much business value, I probably wouldn't use Logstash for it. Its real sweet spot is for exposing logs to users. Real-time exposure to logs, and then extracting and presenting them in a way that you don't have to do a crazy grep and awk statement for. Does that make sense?
Like 1 day's of clicks. Say you have a website, you want to know what people are clicking on.
Mm-hmm.
You have all these events, and you want to pay Google Analytics.
This is true. If you are a website owner and you want to understand the behavior of your website viewers, then that's a perfectly valid use case. That's this sort of thing right here. In this case, I'm graphing return codes, but I could just as well be looking at the top 20 queries that or paths that my website serves, or for that matter, I could be graphing the latitude and longitude on a map, and doing like a heat map of across the country of who my users are, so that I can maybe understand what sort of Google AdWords region they're in, or something like, I don't know.
So it's my understanding that there are Elasticsearch clients that, I think Blizzard is one of them, where they actually log all sorts of analytics about the games that are being, that people are using. So like tons of data that they do to analyze what's happening. And so I think that's closer to what you're looking.
Yeah, no, Brian uses it. But they use Hadoop.
Oh, they use Hadoop. Okay. Yeah. So
I mean,
I think that
if I remember, I said that Elasticsearch is fun to administer if it's small, but kind of a pain in the neck when it's big. if you need to have that big of an Elasticsearch cluster, because at its heart, Elasticsearch is a full text search engine, which is the reason that it's great for logs, because if a developer just goes to Kibana and types, a phrase, then Elasticsearch can search all of the things over the last 30 minutes and show him where that phrase pops up. But we don't, in your case, maybe I don't care exactly about the text of my logs. I just want to count cardinality of a certain number of things across some sort of dimensions. So maybe, especially at scale, you don't want to run Elasticsearch, because when you serialize everything into JSON, it becomes much bigger. So if you just want to count cardinality, then I would contend that you should look for some sort of program that lets you, or that is geared for that. Because Elasticsearch is really just about text search.
Yeah, I'm kind of fit around competitive.
No, it's.
Oh, I try to use other things.
I've been having this discussion with an engineer who thinks that we're going to run a 500 node Elasticsearch cluster, and I recoil in horror. I've been trying to argue this exact point with him. So yeah, it could be that you just touched a nerve with me right now.
So can you say it's doable, not you wouldn't recommend it?
Yeah, it just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel like the right solution for that sort of problem. In my opinion.
Just one website. What about Google Analytics?
Well,
Yeah.
Google Analytics is nice, but it samples your data. If you have too much data, it's not good.
Well,
So then you have to pay like $100K.
if I'm just a small, if I'm running just a small website, and I had,
It's not small. It's small.
Oh,
okay.
Okay. Yeah, because you said small workers.
So it's probably good enough that it doesn't Google Analytics.
A question or comment. The question is, way back in the beginning, you showed that using Bock, you can parse out all this individual pieces of data, so that you can only log exactly what you want. Can you add things to that? Like if you have an app that, for example, is really primitive and doesn't even timestamp its log entries, can you add a timestamp?
Well, by default, when you input using the file thing, it will, let me just click on the thing. So if I input using this file filter, or even if I input using, by tailing a file with FileBeat, if there is no timestamp on the file, it will just add a timestamp.
Oh, I see.
With whenever it noticed that line appear, which is probably good enough for most things, but it might not be good enough if you want to have like millisecond precision. I don't know.
And the comment was, and especially since you mentioned system taking over the world later, you were talking about structured and unstructured log data, and it made me laugh because I used to work for CoreOS and I taught their classes on CoreOS and Kubernetes. And part of the CoreOS part of that curriculum was we tried to get people, at least a working knowledge of systemd and journalD, because CoreOS only has those. There's no syslog there unless you put it there. And so I would always get that one systemd hater in the room, and I was like, I know, you just want your plain text unstructured log files. But let me show you why journalD is 18,000 times better than your plain text unstructured log files. Because it's structured log data, and I can do all these commands on the fly that you have to go through and set up a billion syslog filters to be able to do even a tenth of.
At some point, I'm going to have to figure out how to get logs out of journalD. I haven't made that journey yet.
Oh, it's awesome. You're gonna love it.
Any other questions, comments? Hi, yeah.
Is there any other visualizations other than Kibana? Instead of Elasticsearch?
I mean, it's Elasticsearch. So there's a whole API that you could call.
There's a couple of the dashboards out there.
Kibana is kind of the best tool for that job. What it's good at is looking at time series events. But there are also, for instance, Grafana will accept Elasticsearch as a data source. I know that the common use case for doing that is to provide some like markups against. So the classic thing would be if I have some graphite data of like mapping out return codes, and if I had a release process that logged every release event into Elasticsearch, the time that release happened, then you could overlay those Elasticsearch events on top of your graphite or your other Grafana stuff, and then you could correlate. Oh, look, when I made this release, I got all these 404s, and then you can.
So suppose I have a couple of servers running on Apache.
Okay.
So suppose I want to monitor those logs using Logstash. So,
then if you wanted to monitor those logs, you would probably want to do exactly what this gentleman was talking about, was extracting metrics that you care about. So maybe you count how many logs that look like a certain thing come across the wire per minute, and then you increment some sort of a gauge in graphite or Prometheus if you want to be hip and happening. Oh, that's true. Speak up.
This you have brown bag of Elastigirl. So Elastigirl is one of the open source tools you can either like go directly to Kibana searches or Logstash. You can do learning. You can do. It has different functionalities part of it. It can plug into Slack or integrate into notified users.
Do you remember I said that Elasticsearch has a whole rich query language and API? ElastAlert is a thing that uses that. You have a pre-baked search, and you can say, if this pre-baked search returns 5 things, then make my pager go off. Or, write a message into a Slack channel, or, send an email or something like that. Yeah.
The Kibana, I think it's called KAA.
Hmm?
There's a Kibana, you can also do the same thing. It's KAA.
KAA. Oh, is there a plugin for Kibana? Oh, okay. Interesting. I had that. Okay. You should definitely pitch in and paste these things into the to the Slack room, and I will I will try to post that that blog post that talked about how to make statsd things happen out of your logs, because that seems like an interesting thing. Anything else?
I think there's one thing to note here, by the way, and that's the importance I've always felt of having the log aggregation available in all your environments, not just production. Meaning your developers should be using the log aggregation system in development environment, because that gives them appreciation for what should be logged. And I think anytime software goes into test and production, it should go a dashboard to monitor. It should go along that's ready at that point.
Not only that, but anytime you treat production and test differently, or test and dev differently than production, then that's a bad time. Yeah.
Yeah, another case for that actually is I look at that as a great opportunity for, if you have separate operations from the dev and test folks, they get to collaborate, saying this is the set of queries that work well for me, and vice versa.
This is how you know if my stuff is working or not. They should be able to look at a dashboard and tell if things are good or bad for your new service.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be something ops has to figure out downstream. That's crazy. Which, by the way, is one of the problems with expensive or proprietary systems, is that That's a thing I've seen with Splunk. I've used Splunk a fair amount, and that is there's a tendency not to use it in development because it burns up their license. So they'll use it in production, which means the developers don't tend to use it. Instead, it becomes the operations people and the developers don't develop their logging in a way to generate stuff that is helpful.
That sounds non-useful.
An interesting thing to do is we look at Google searches of Splunk and Elk. Splunk looks like this, and Elk looks like that.
Yeah.
But if you look at where, Elk is all in Europe, Russia, all that area, and Splunk is all in the United States and Canada.
What do you about Fluent? Now, I mean, EFK has gotten quite a bit more press.
And also another competitor to Logstash that I have been saying that I'll maybe take a look at is FluentD. That is very hip and happening. They say it's better because it doesn't need Java, but then again, you don't need Java to run FileBeat either. So
I felt it's good.
I'm an old dog. I like to stick to what I know.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
All
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks also for waiting outside. I don't know how long it was, but you and I believe Fatima and Sally were outside for a while, and I just really appreciate that. Sorry, we didn't know that the door was locked.
That's all right.
Next time we'll have assistant in place.
They waited longer than I did.
Yeah. Well, still, thanks. We'll set up a last alert or something. We'll have it like out there. We got people straggling.
Or just a pile of bricks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, that would have been. That'll work too. The old-fashioned way. That's a really cool effect. Yeah. That's what happens when you're inside of a Docker container. Well, thanks everyone. I don't want to hold you up too much, but I do have two things to say really quickly. I have the place I work for does use we use Elasticsearch, we use Kibana, we do a lot with it, and one of the things we have is a pie chart on traffic organized by country. If you want to see it real quick, is the stream still going? Can we cut the stream for a second?
If you you don't want it.
Yeah, I don't want it.
Okay, hang on. We'll go and stop the broadcast. All right, we are. So you do not want this.
Not at all.